Thank you, CII, Mr. Ravi Sam. Having heard some of the stories, very troubling. I have to confess that my story isn't remotely as noble or, there was no great sacrifice that I made. I happen to come from a very relatively wealthy family, a very successful father, who was CEO of many companies. So I wanted to be like him and did an MBA and all the rest of it. And about 10, 12 years ago, when I was living in London, I had some very soul-searching conversations with a friend of mine, a very perceptive spiritual person, who'd known me for many years. And he pointed out to me that I was basically leading a very selfish life, very one-dimensional. Banking is a very one-dimensional kind of life. And that I needed to reach out to society. Now, I'd been thinking about this for many years. I'd gone to Rishi Valley, and from a young age, I used to hear Krishnamurti talk about the meaning of life and transforming your psyche and all the rest of it. And I realized I was just reading his books and listening to his talks, but I hadn't practiced anything in a fundamental way. So my friend pointed that out to me over several months, perhaps even a year or two. And I said, I took what I call a deathbed view of life, and I do that often even now, and I'm getting much older, so perhaps it's more realistic. And asked myself, if I were on my deathbed, what would I remember? What would sort of gladden my heart? And I realized, not surprisingly, that it wasn't all those PowerPoint presentations I'd made at Citibank. Useful as they were in terms of advancing my career and making money and all the rest of it, but it didn't really leave any kind of impress on my psyche. So I realized that, okay, this isn't it. And life is short, as the young man was saying. This isn't it. So what is it then? And going back many years, I had this sort of idealistic dream of building a school for creative leaders in the Himalayas. So I thought, well, let's go for it. And I'm not an educator, I'm not a scientist, and I wasn't then. So I just went with it. It was an impulsive decision. But I must say I was fortunate. I had good advisors. They were retired. My father, the former chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. We did a lot of brainstorming and came to the conclusion that what the system lacks is the spirit of inquiry. There's no creativity, or very little sense of creativity in the education system. So if we could infuse that somehow, then that could have a transformative effect, bring about certain behavioral changes, namely from getting people to shift from yes to why, from just looking to learning to observe deeply, from being very passive to learning to explore, from being very textbook bound to being very hands-on. And we said if we can initiate these shifts, then we'll bring about a shift from fear to confidence. I think you've heard many speakers say today that fear is not just in the classrooms, but even in, august audiences like this, where we're afraid to really speak out. And if you brought about these shifts or catalyzed them at any rate, you go from acceptance to leadership. These are the qualities I think we've seen in spades in some of the entrepreneurs and the great, transformative social workers that have come and spoken. So is it possible through a certain type of education to accelerate these shifts in society? Was our mission. And over the years, we've worked with about 4 million children, used experiential hands-on methods of learning. And I think we are getting there. I'll tell you a small story. There were these two village girls who went and sat under a tree, Rani and Roja, to escape from the sun. And they asked the question, why do you feel cool or cooler sitting in the shade of a tree? The answer was obvious. The leaves and branches of the tree were shielding them from the hot rays of the sun. But they wondered further, would different leaves have different cooling effects? Their question led to a project titled, not surprisingly, The Cooling Effect of Leaves. And under our supervision, 9 months later, they won the prestigious Intel Iris National Science Award, competing with some of India's best and brightest kids. Now, for 4 years in a row, village kids trained by our foundation have been winning these awards. And this year, 2 girls from Kuppam are going to the US. So, there's a lot of hope that a lot of these children who are just going by the wayside because they don't get the kind of stimuli they need at critical stages in their lives that can give them a glimmer of hope, self-belief, and perhaps some of the tools to cross all the hurdles and challenges and difficulties they encounter. So that's what we're doing, and we've become the largest hands-on mobile science education program, but actually it's a curiosity sparking program in the world today. And we've done a lot of innovative stuff, and I'd love for many of you to come and visit our campus in Kuppam and see our work and give us your thoughts and advice. Today is a special day for me because it's my father's birthday. He passed away 2 years ago. And I was thinking about him on the flight from Mumbai to here. And I must say, one day over a drink, because I never asked my father, what did you think? I quit this great job. Maybe I could have become the CEO of a big company. There are certain things you don't sometimes express. And I remember over a drink, the veranda in Whitefield, one day he said, I used to wonder if you'd made a big mistake, switching. And I really was wondering, how are you going to come back to India after living abroad for 20 odd years and deal with all these Indian scientists, let alone people at the village level. But I must say, since you look up to Krishnamurti so much, and my father was also from Rishi Valley, the first batch, I think somewhere in his grave he's probably smiling that perhaps one of his students did something sensible. Now that was the best compliment I could get. So, that's my story. Thank you.
Ramji, I'm going to ask you a question. You said from the passive yes to the inquiring why. There is also a simile to this, where an increasing number of Indians moving into middle class and upper middle class sections of the community are also passive yes when it comes to society and active yes when it comes to them. How do you think initiatives such as yours can also stimulate that section of Indian community, or globally as well, to think about the yes and the why in a broader context?
The middle and the upper middle. Yeah, absolutely. The problem we have with the middle and upper middle, and I include myself, is there's a lot of baggage. Because you think you've cracked the code, that you've got into an IIT or an IIM or wherever, right? So getting bandwidth with people like that is a little more difficult than a village kid whose mind is very virgin and who's willing to listen. It's like a sponge. So how do you communicate? I mean, it's a vicious circle. If you go to the schools, the best schools in India, the teachers will tell you that, very good teachers, we're not able to get across to the kids because the parents are not communicating with the children. Very few parents actually sit and talk about important life issues with their kids. So there's very little questioning, there's very little interaction, and it's a mindless kind of thing. I'm not saying everyone is like that, and we've seen so many exceptions, which is so heartening. So that is a big issue, but I think what you have to be able to see is that I was talking to these slum girls in Mumbai, where we're running a science fair we just finished today, is that you are the world, and the world is you. Now, seeing that maybe requires a leap in terms of insight. And sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. But if you can see it, then you realize that you can't succeed and be in an island of prosperity in the middle of misery, because you will not be happy. And so what you do affects others, and what others do affects you. So I think, that's the only way, and how you get that across is not easy. But it can be done.
If I may open for a question from the audience. Okay. So maybe that will be for dinner. Ramji, if you may pause and accept the honor from CII. There's a question here.
Mr. Raghavan, we are running a school, Can we learn something from you? Can we send somebody to your school to be there for some time to learn how you are practicing it?
Absolutely. We are looking to start some mobile science labs in Coimbatore. You know, I've been talking to the chairman of L&T about it, Nayak, and he said, you know, maybe next year we'll start something in Coimbatore. We'll sponsor it. So if that happens, we'll be here on a continuous basis. But if that doesn't happen, you're more than welcome to send people to our campus, and we'll be happy to work with them, train them, no problems whatsoever. We'd be delighted to.
Thank you.
Sure.
We would also like to sponsor your initiative here in Coimbatore.
Oh, terrific. We'll give him a hand. Thanks.
Ramji, you'll be happy to know L&T, which is a distinguished member of CII here as well, has adopted 2 panchayats for the last 5 years and has been working with the schools there. May I request the CII representative?
Can I please request Dr. Ramni Shankar, founder trustee Shankar Eye Hospital, to felicitate Mr. Ramji Raghavan. A round of applause.